Hi everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to talk about being a trans woman in the chess world. I made a similar video in French a couple of months ago and I believe it had a beneficial impact, so I decided to make another one in English. Plus it is the end of Pride Month and I think only Lichess celebrated kind of Pride Month this year with one tweet, which is not much, but if I'm not mistaken, better than any other chess institution. I saw nothing from FIDE, nothing from any other chess federation, nothing from chess.com or Chessable or Chess24. So thank you, Lichess, and happy Pride Month to whomever it concerns. And there is a French proverb that goes, "You are never better served than by yourself." So here I am making this video. So just before we are going to dive into chess, I wanted to give a few words about trans women in sports in general, which is a very touchy subject nowadays. For instance, a couple of months ago, a trans woman finished at place 6,160, and that brought her a torrent of hatred from conservative journals with titles like "A man beat 14,000 women in sport" and so on. So please be open-minded. And just before we are going to talk about trans women in sports, a couple of examples of intersex people in sport. So as you may know, as you probably know, there are four sexes in a human. There are the genitals, either penis, either a vagina, or neither or both. There are the chromosomes, XY, XX, or something else like XXY, it happens. There are the gonads, so testicles or ovaries of or neither or both. And finally, hormones, testosterone or estrogens. So in most people, by far, these four sexes are all male or all female, but for some people, naturally, there is something else or a combination of male and female sexes. So these people are called intersex people, and intersex people in sports have brought questions since a long time. For instance, this woman, Stanislava Valesievich, she was a runner. She participated in Summer's Olympics, and she was finally killed at old age. Nothing to do with her sports career or intersex situation. But there was an autopsy made, and the autopsy revealed that she was intersex. Maybe she didn't even know it, but she was intersex, so it brought questions toward fairness. Was it fair that she participated in these Olympics and won gold and so on, or was it not? Also, Maria Jose Martinez Patiño, she was a hurdler from Spain, and at that time, the International Olympic Committee made some regulations about intersex people and also trans people in sports with a gender test, and she failed a gender test, which revealed that not only she was XY, but she had a high level of testosterone, like male level of testosterone. So she was banned, and saying it like this, you might think, yeah, of course she was banned. I mean, was she even a she? Like, if she's XY and had high level of testosterone, it's just a man, yeah, pretending to be a woman. But no, because she was assigned female at birth. And why is that? Because she was insensitive to testosterone. So when she was just an embryo, she was insensitive to testosterone, so she developed a vagina and so on, and she was assigned female at birth, and she didn't even know she was intersex. So, but she was banned, and she fought her ban, and she proved, with the help of doctors and lawyers, that she had no advantage whatsoever of being intersex, and finally she could participate again in women's sports. So yeah, with her we are going to close the subject of intersex people in sports. Just before, it's rare, of course, but it's not that rare, depending on the definition of intersex that you take. There are up to 1.7% of the population which is intersex, which is 1 in 60. So yeah, it's rare, but not that rare. So now let's talk about trans people. First, trans men in sports. Basically, they are men who wants to fight or compete against men, and most of them are allowed to do so. For instance, this boxer, Patricio Manuel, who has a record of 3 fights, 3 professional fights in box, and he won all his matches. So yeah, but trans men are not the problem in sports. Basically, if they want, they can, and of course it's much tougher for them, but people don't care that much about trans men in sport. The question is about trans women, and the question is always brought about fairness. Is that fair for trans women to compete against cis women in sport? And it's funny because this is the only time that fairness is brought into question in sports, because sports, by definition, by its nature, is not fair. For instance, maybe you have heard about Victor Wembanyama, who is a French basketballer, and he is 7 feet 5 inches, so 2 meters 26. And is that fair? Of course not. But no one cares because he's a man and a cis man, so no one asks whether it's fair or not that he participates in basketball in NBA. And his mother was also very tall. She was 6 feet 3 inches, which is 1 meter 91. So she's much taller than many trans women. So like, is that fair that she can, and she was a professional basketballer also. So is that fair that she can, but maybe I can't, even though she is much taller than me and she has much more muscle than me. So the question of fairness in sports is only brought when it is about trans women and our biology, which is a bit strange. And also, there is this common belief, this myth, that your sport skills are basically your biology that you multiply by the amount of hard work that you put, and that's it, which is an overly simplistic view. Your sports skills are dependent on many factors. Most of them are social factors. For instance, if you are rich, you have an advantage, maybe an unfair advantage, against poor people. And as you know, trans women are, in general, on average, much poorer than cis women or than any other gender category. Also, you need to be a successful sportswoman or sportsman, you need parental support. And as you know, trans women tend to have parental problems rather than support, or rejection rather than support. Also, you need generally social support. You need supporters, basically. You need to feel at home, and victories need to bring you congratulations, not hatred. And as you know, it's not the case for trans women. So it might be that in some sports, even after their hormonal transition, some trans women still have a biological advantage, maybe because they are a bit taller than cis women, maybe because they have um, bigger hands or higher bone density, even though they have low testosterone, like female level of testosterone and female level of estrogens. Maybe they keep a small biological advantage in some sports. But I think the social disadvantages do more than compensate for this small advantage that might be still there or not. And to be sure, we should look at the numbers. And what do the numbers say? So basically, trans women are allowed in the Olympics since 1993. Since then, there has been 63,000 Olympians, so men and women. So because there is about 0.3% of the population which is trans, we should have had at least a couple of hundreds of trans people in the Olympics since 1993. And maybe if there is an advantage for trans women, at least dozens of trans women, yeah. But the truth is there was only one trans woman, and she played in the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. And by the way, she lost on the first round. So yeah, numbers also tend to show that there is no advantage whatsoever of being a trans woman in sport. Also, there was never a trans woman who reached a podium on a continental or world championship. So a European, American, or world championship. Not one, not once. So yeah, basically, this might not be what you hear everywhere else, but I really think nowadays it's still much harder for trans women in sports than it is for cis women, even though in some sports we might have, on average at least, some advantage. Anyway, also, if you do rules, if you write rules to forbid trans women in sports, it will be also a problem for every woman. For instance, in the USA there has been many laws, and in Ohio a bill wanted to require genital checks for young girls, I mean cis girls and trans girls, to be sure that intersex people and trans girls were not participating among cis girls, which is unbelievable, just. And also a few days ago, maybe you saw this story of a man in Canada who questioned a 9-year-old gender. Basically, he said that she was trans, and he wanted to check her genitals. So of course she cried. And by the way, she was not trans. She was just a cis girl wanting to run with her friends. But because she was good and maybe a bit masculine, I don't even know, she was accused of being trans. So yeah, these rules are not only against trans women, they are against every woman when you implement them. Also, there are many things that one can do to support women's sports. For instance, there is a lack of funding, a lack of recognition, a lack of media visibility. So if you want to fight for sportswomen, fight for all this. But if your only fight is against trans women, it will do us harm, okay, but it will bring no good to any cis woman. So now that we spoke about sports in general, which is not my favorite topic, let's dive into chess. And before we are going to talk about trans women, I wanted to talk about a few historical figures who maybe were not trans or maybe not even queer, but who challenged or question or break the gender rules of that time. And the first one is La Chevalière de Beaumont, who was maybe the most inspiring figure of the 18th century. She was a spy for Louis XV, Louis XV, and I say she, but she was assigned male at birth. But for her spy missions, she had to become or to present at least as a woman in Russia and then in London. And she decided, after many adventures, to spend the rest of her life as a woman, even though Louis XV, Louis XV was dead and she was no longer a spy, and she could have lived as a man, but she decided to live as a woman. So was she trans or whatever, it will be anachronistic to even ask the question. But she was definitely someone who broke the gender roles of her time. And it just so happens that she was a good friend of Philidor, and she played chess. I saw her chess sets at her museum, and so yeah, she was the first let's say trans woman who played chess at a high level and was friend with the best player of her time. Next player we are going to talk about might be just a bit controversial. I am fully aware of this. We are going to talk about Paul Morphy. So as you know, Morphy is widely considered as one of the greatest geniuses of our game. He played the most famous game in chess history, the opera game in Paris. And what you might not know was that Morphy was very effeminate, had delicate manners, and many writers wrote about Morphy passing for a woman. For instance, the chess historian Mr. Diggle wrote the following: I see more charm than harm in the passing for a woman reference. One contemporary described Morphy, in contrast with earlier champions, as disposing of his opponents with an almost womanly ease and grace. Also, when Morphy traveled to Europe to beat every chess masters there, and before coming back to America after 2 years and quitting chess, he was not alone. He was accompanied by a man named Frederick H., who wrote the following about his relationship to Morphy. I have been a lover, a brother, a mother to you. I have made you an idol, a god. So, of course, at that time, the word lover was not necessarily implying that they had a sexual relationship with each other, but, well, it might have been the case. Anyway, Morphy's niece also was the following. She described how Morphy, as an adult, lived in a room separated from his mother's by a narrow hall. That Morphy's room was always kept in perfect order, for he was very particular and neat. That Morphy also collected shoes of all kinds, and so on, and that he had a huge portmanteau he was willing to fashion, and that all his clothes were at all times neatly pressed and creased. So for all these reasons, Morphy's sexuality, or lack of, has been a heated subject among chess historians for at least 150 years. And the question is often, was Morphy homosexual or not? And I think it's nonsense. at least anachronistic to ask the question like this, because the word homosexual was not invented before Morphy quit chess, and it became popular only after Morphy's death. At that time, sexuality was not an identity. It was not something that you were. It was a behavior, something that you did or did not. So we might wonder, what if Morphy was alive today? Would Morphy be 2500s, 2700s, 2900s? Would Morphy be a straight man, or a gay man, or a non-binary person, or even a trans woman? But I think it doesn't really matter, so make up your own mind about this. For me, what matters is that young queer people nowadays could recognize themselves in Morphy's femininity. They could look at this incredible genius and, yeah, see, hey, I am a bit like Morphy, and maybe I can be the next Morphy. Next, we are going to talk about Rrose Sélavy, aka Marcel Duchamp, here taken in picture by Meier. So everyone knows about Marcel Duchamp as an artist, but not everyone knows that Marcel Duchamp quit the world of arts to become a chess player, a professional chess player. He played in many French championships and even represented France in a few Olympiads, at least 3, if I'm not mistaken. And all his life, Marcel Duchamp had an alter ego, a feminine alter ego, named Rrose Sélavy. So he dressed as a woman, Rrose Sélavy, and she had her own artistic career and so on. Even very late in his life, Marcel Duchamp often dressed in public as Rrose Sélavy and went to restaurants with friends as a woman, as Rrose Sélavy. So again, was Marcel Duchamp a closeted trans woman? It would be anachronistic to ask, but definitely someone who broke some gender roles. Next player we are going to talk about is one of my favorite players ever, Sonja Graf, here on the left. She was the second best woman in the world in the 1920s and 30s, the best woman in the world being Vera Menchik here on the right. So, of course, in the 1920s, the look à la garçonne, the boyish look, was very popular, but it's fair to say that for Sonja Graf it was probably much more than a fashion statement, because, for instance, she wrote during her first game against a man how she felt just like a man. Also, she wrote about this story which happened to her in Barcelona during a chess tournament. So she decided to dress as a man, as she almost always did at the time, but also to wear a fake mustache. And she went to dance. So at first she danced with a woman, of course, but at some point a male friend of her recognized her, and they decided to dance together. But because even in Barcelona at the time it was impossible for two men to dance together, they got kicked out of the club. And yeah, so definitely someone who challenged or even broke some gender rules. But of course it would be also anachronistic to say that Sonja Graf was non-binary or whatever. Now let's talk about trans women in chess, and let's start with the oldest one, Natalia Parés Vives, from Spain, from Catalonia. She was born in 1955. She became a FIDE master before her transition, and she decided to quit chess for 15 years in order to transition quietly, let's say. And she came back to competition in 2008 when she participated in the Olympiads in Dresden with a women's Spanish team. The second one is Annemarie Meier from Germany. born in 1957. She had a very similar story. She quit chess for 15 years to transition, and she came back to competition in the late 90s. And in 2003, she won the women's title in the German championship. Actually, I remember it was my first memory of a trans woman in chess because I was in Germany in 2003, just after Annemarie won her title, and yeah, it was the first time that uh, I saw the possibility of transitioning and still play chess. Yeah, in 2003, a long time ago. So in physical sports, most of the difference between men and women come from whether you have high level of testosterone or low level of testosterone but high level of estrogens. And in chess too, you sometimes hear unproven, non-scientific claims about an alleged role of testosterone. Most of the time it goes like this. They take one cliché about chess, one cliché about testosterone, and they establish a dubious causal link between the two. For instance, they will say chess is a game of war, and testosterone is a hormone of aggressivity. Therefore, men are stronger than women in chess. To which we could claim, with the same lack of rigor, that chess is a game of patience, and testosterone is a hormone of impulsivity. Therefore, men are naturally weaker than women in chess. So there has been no scientific study regarding an eventual role of testosterone in chess, so I can only speak about myself. For me, hormone therapy was life-saving. I have welcomed every change that it gives me with joy, with happiness, with almost mystical sense of finally becoming myself. I have loved every changes that it gives me, and physiological changes, biological changes, psychological changes. I saw many changes and I loved every one of them. But I saw no change regarding my chess play. My chess thinking is the same, at least I believe, and my chess strength is more or less the same. So to me, changing my hormones brought many changes outside chess, but none regarding chess. There is also a popular belief that every man has a masculine brain and every woman has a feminine brain, and that the two are very different and that it is a biological destiny after birth. But this overly simplistic and binary view is totally unfounded, and it has been refuted by the discovery and the understanding of neural plasticity. And nowadays, every neuroscientist agrees that there is some little differences between the average male brain and the average female brain, but that there can be more differences between two people of the same sex rather than the average of the two sexes. So, saying like Nigel Short, a former world vice champion and current FIDE deputy, saying that women don't have the brain to play chess is not only misogynist, is simply stupid. But what is interesting is that on average, trans women, even before our transition, tend to have more feminine brain. So yeah, if the difference between men and women in chess doesn't come from biology, then where does it come from? And let's take an example of a little girl who will become a chess champion. To become a chess champion, first she needs an adult, someone to teach her chess, which is quite rare because very often the father teaches his son, but not his daughter, how to play chess. So, okay, maybe nowadays it's a bit more different, also thanks to the Queen's Gambit, but just to learn the rules, a girl needs a bit of luck. Next, she needs her parents to agree to bring her to the chess club, which not every parent will do because chess is often seen as a decent activity for a boy, but not so for a girl. Next, when she opens the door of the chess club, she will very likely see a man, a teacher, a man, teaching great game of male chess players of the past or the present to boys. And she will have no role model. She will have no one to identify to. She will have maybe no friends because it's not that easy for a girl to become friends with boys, especially when she is the only one in the club. So it is another challenge. But if she stays in the club, her next big problem will be her puberty. Because as you know, chess is most chess tournaments are mixed between genders, but also between players of all ages, which can be great if you are not a young girl or a woman in becoming who suddenly is perceived as sexually attractive by older men. And this period is the hardest for many women chess players or girl chess players, and many of them quit chess at that time. So it's clear that it is much harder for a woman than it is for a man to reach high level of chess because of social factors. But is it also true for trans women? So after our transition, I think it's clear for everyone that we have many more struggles than men have. But what about before our transition? Because many people wrongly think, that before our transition we live the life of boys and men, which for most of us at least is simply not true. And it was clearly not true for me. So I was raised in an average French family. I was baptized. I went to Catholic school, and I didn't know anyone queer before I was a teenager or a young adult even. But despite all this, I have pictures of me at age 6 or 7 from the family album where I am dressed as a girl. One picture, the caption reads, "My sister thought I was a fairy," and the other, the caption reads, "Am I a cute little girl?" So, yeah, I was only 6 or 7. When I was 11, I remember a crazy discussion with a friend because I thought I was a boy because everyone told me so, and I liked the vocabulary of saying I am a pre-transition girl and so on. But I thought that every boy was just like me and regretted that they were not girls. So basically, I thought that humanity was divided between, on one side, lucky girls, and on the other side, people who wished they were girls instead. So I remember this discussion where I was like, "Oh, they're so lucky," and it was like, "Whoa, but girls, of course, it's so much greater to be a girl." And he looked at me as if I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" And I was shocked. "But don't you wish to be a girl instead?" And he was like, "No, of course not." And I thought he was as crazy as he thought I was crazy. But anyway, as a kid, it was a strange life. Definitely not the life of a cis girl, but also not the life of a boy. And when I was a teenager, I had more struggles to fight. When I was 16, I decided to leave my biological family alone to go to Russia, and where I lived in a host family that I did not know before. So I understand that Russia was a strange, strange choice for a young queer person in the early 2000s. But let's just say that I wanted to go as far as possible because I thought that going far for a long time was better than going forever. So I stayed in Russia for 1 year before I came back to France to finish high school, and then I started to work as a professional chess trainer. And at that point, I was 19, 20, and I really thought about starting a transition, but because I lacked money and support, because maybe it wasn't true, but I really thought that by transitioning I would lose everyone around me, and I could not work as a trainer anymore, and I was too scared to transition. So for a long time I hesitated, and finally I decided, okay, let's. It would be my biggest regret of my life, and not being a woman, but I have to try to live as a man. But it was impossible because you can lie to yourself for some period of time, but at some point, nightmares and so on remind you that you are lying to yourself and um, not being yourself. So at some point, I couldn't lie anymore, and I finally came out and decided to transition while still playing chess and while still working as a trainer. And I could not have transitioned without the incredible support of my friends, who are all chess players and mostly women. I'm not exaggerating if I say that they definitely saved my life. But in general, chess players have accepted me very easily and very quickly. Not all of them, of course, but the vast majority by far. And I feel very lucky. It was a bit more hard with the chess institutions to be recognized as a female player. It took me some fight, but it is finally the case. In case you are wondering, the International Olympic Committee decided that every international federations can set their own rules, and FIDE decided that every national federation can set their own rules. So in France, it's now possible to play as a woman when you are a trans woman, and some countries and most countries, unfortunately, it is still impossible. Online, it's slightly a different story because, well, you know how people are online. Uh, Almost every day I receive at least one transphobic message, a remark, or insult. There have been articles from far-right magazines written about me just to call for hatred. And when I win a chess game or a competition, I can be sure that it's not one but dozens of messages of hatred. And every time it hurts, uh, first because as every human, I'm a social person, and so it hurts to be rejected. It also hurts because it brings me back to a time where I was quite depressed, to say the least, and when I was wondering whether it could be possible to be accepted as a trans woman in the chess world. And finally, it hurts because I know it can also hurt people who can identify with me. So through this compassion, it can hurt too. But anyway, all this hatred is more than compensated by all the support that I have, not only from my friends, which I mentioned, but also from players all over the world. And it really means so much to me. If you have sent me at least one message of support, of sisterhood, of love, thank you so much. Thank you so much, because it gives me strength. It gives me the strength to cope with all this hatred. And without this support, I don't think I would be strong enough to continue playing. So thank you. Anyway, let's switch to a very strange world, the world of transvestigation in chess. So yeah, it's a mix between conspiracy theory and transphobia. For instance, did you know that Magnus Carlsen was truly a trans man? The proof being his torso, where some people believe they can recognize the after effect of torsoplasty. Also, the Bottas sisters are trans, at least according to this person, who think she recognized male characteristic on the Bottas sisters. So anyway, it just shows that how stupid people can be and how transphobia affects everyone, not only trans people. So speaking of LGBTphobia again, you remember that I started my video by thanking Lichess for the Happy Pride Month message, stating Lichess is for everyone, chess is for everyone. So because of this very controversial statement, chess is for everyone, how dare they? Lichess received a ton of hatred in response. So let's just look at the top tweets in response to Lichess' tweet. Unfortunately, rainbow flag is not sign of tolerance anymore, quite opposite I would say. I thought Lichess was better than this. Yeah, I guess Lichess is for immoral and degenerate people too, I don't mind. Plus many people tweeted that they were done with Lichess because of this tweet and they will play on chess.com instead. So I think these messages are proof that we really need the support of every chess organization. Because for you, for the chess, it is only once a year. But for every queer chess player out there, this kind of messages is our daily routine. And we could not cope with this level of hatred if we didn't have support. And support can not only come from individuals, it should also come from organizations. So thank you again, HS, and I hope other organizations will be as courageous as you. In the meantime, thank you so much for having watched this video. I really hope that you liked it. If you want to leave a message, please do, but remember that you can have a huge impact not only with me, but also with everyone who might identify with me. And this impact can be beneficial or bad, depending on whether you write with understanding and compassion or not. So anyway, I wish you a good day or a good evening and see you soon. Ciao.